God, these weapons formed against me, they seem like they prospering. By the way, many of those are verses we take out of context. That's a whole nother sermon, though. Write this down. It's our second point. When tempted to run from your assignment, choose to rest in his sovereignty. We'll say it again. When tempted to run from your assignment, choose to rest in his sovereignty. I want us to be very clear about what's happening right here. Elijah's ready to die. He's suicidal. The only reason he's not trying to take his own life is because in Israelite culture, it was viewed as a slap to the face of God to take your life. So he prays, God, you take my life. I'd rather you take my life than Jezebel. Take away my life. In the heat of the moment, Elijah couldn't see well. He was exhausted. He was at his wit's end. He couldn't see the spiritual warfare happening right before his eyes. Suicidal. In other words, hopeless. There's no more hope for me. Oftentimes, you and I overlook spiritual warfare because we're so preoccupied with success and comfort. That's why we forget we're in a spiritual war, because we want to be comfortable. I don't want to be a soldier, God. I just want to sit down and get blessed all the time. By the way, you do get blessed all the time. It just don't look how you want it to look. You want to be fed. You don't want to have to lift your hand. You want, God, can you bring it all the way over here? Like my kids. Elijah was working for God, but the enemy was working too. The enemy is working too in your life. I need you to hear me. I know you go to church. I know you're faithful, but there's an enemy seeking to destroy you currently as we speak. Even as I speak, he's hoping to take something I say and turn it a degree or two off so you don't get the truth that God wants you to get. There's a real enemy. So you're a soldier whether you want to be or not. The shooting won't stop. The arrows won't stop. So what are you going to do? You're going to be a soldier or a spectator? This is war, Elijah. This is war. Now, I want to have grace for Elijah because it took a lot of faith for him to do what he did in the previous chapter. And I'm going to tell you why what Elijah did is actually a good thing. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it later. So Elijah was working for God, but the enemy was working too. Here it is. The enemy's strategy, watch this, was to eliminate Elijah's hope because he knows if I can take his hope, I won't have to. That we let them take our hope. Somewhere I read, this ain't even your house. This ain't even your home. Why are you downtrodden? You ain't got to deal with biting the Trump too much longer. Life is but a vapor. So the enemy's strategy was to eliminate hope. That's his strategy in our life. His strategy has not changed. His goal has not changed. He's after your hope. He's after your hope. In other words, this is what the enemy says. If I can't take you to hell in eternity, I'll take you to hell on earth. That's why you suffer, Christian. You're in a spiritual war. Is your armor on? The enemy still seeks to get you to place your hope in anything or anyone but God. His strategy has not changed. Let me ask you a question. Remember how much hope you had when you first got married? Oh, it's quiet. Most of us were standing up there, you couldn't knock the smile off our face. Remember how much joy you had when you first got saved? People couldn't shut you up about God. You had zeal. You had zeal, maybe you lacked a little wisdom. Maybe you lacked a little discernment. So watch this. Now that you felt the disappointment and the failure, your disappointment has given birth to a heart of discontentment. Let me say that again. Now that you felt the disappointment and the failure, your disappointment has given birth to a heart of discontentment. Now you're on your way to hopelessness. You've been disappointed because your hope wasn't in the right place. The pastor fell into sin and your faith shipwrecked. Oh, I'm talking today. Your spouse's sin has you ready to tap out on your marriage. Or maybe it's your own sin that has you ready to abandon your calling. That's what the enemy's trying to get you to do. His hopelessness, there's a purpose. The hopelessness is to get you to walk away from what God called you to stay in. To not rest in who he is. To not rest in his sovereignty. He wants you to get so down in your marriage that you don't remember that he says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes. Stop listening to these deceivers and get into the word for yourself. Because when you get into the word, you're going to see some men and women who had joy and sorrow. They tasted the goodness of God, but they also tasted the bitterness of their sin. That's real Christianity. They've been with God on the mountaintops, but they've been with him in the valley. That's my story. That's my story. I've said it to y'all before. I've been saved by God, but I've also been suicidal. Yeah. I've been delivered from sin, but I've also been depressed by it. That's why the Apostle Paul says, I have learned to be content with whatever I have. I know what it is to have a little, and I know what it is to have a lot. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I love you. From 2015 to 2017, I would put a rope around my neck every time I felt like I was ready to quit. Me. Every time I was ready to do it, I had a plan. This is my plan of escape. This is how I'm going to go out. Lord, I've had enough. I'm just as good as dead. I'm going to take my life. You know what, though? Every time, let me tell you the reason why I'm breathing right now. I'm breathing right now because I would be ready. I'm pretty convinced that I want to take my life. I was pretty sure. I don't think there's a reason for me to have hope. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. You have to kind of push through those thoughts of your mom being sad and your dad being sad. But you keep going, and you say, but this pain that I'm feeling, it's not going anywhere. It's better off. See, then that's when the enemy starts deceiving even more. He starts to say, you know what? It would be better if you took your life than if you stayed. Your family would be okay. You're a burden to them. So it's better for you to lighten that burden off of them and take your life. And so I would get ready. And then there was this voice, a different voice. These thoughts didn't seem to be coming from me because my thoughts were all going in one direction. But then there was a thought that came that went the opposite direction, and it said, I have plans for you. I have plans for you. You mean too much to me. There's a purpose. Then the verse would get a little bit bolder. The voice would get a little bit bolder. The voice would say, you and I both know that your life is not your own. You and I both know that you can't do this. You and I both know there is a reason for you to live. You and I both know. Because I had a plan before the foundation of the world. I came here to tell somebody your life doesn't have to end. Your life does not have to end. If you're in the room and you've had experiences with suicide, depression, your life doesn't have to end. If you're watching online, your life doesn't have to end. It doesn't have to. There is a still small voice. And watch this. And your marriage doesn't have to be over. And you don't have to give up on your kids. You don't have to give up. There's hope. Maybe you misplaced it, but there's hope. My Bible says, those who wait on the Lord. Those who wait on the Lord. I'm going to slow it down for somebody because there's somebody in the room who's suicidal. There's somebody in the room who's depressed. Those who what? Wait on the Lord. Shall. I need somebody to stand in the shall. Stand in the shall. This is a promise of God. You shall renew your strength. He shall renew your strength. You'll mount up on wings like eagles. Yeah. You'll run and you won't grow weary. You'll walk and you won't grow faint. I'm jumping right now because I got joy in my heart that I didn't have in 2017. Oh, I feel it. I believe it. I hope your faith is rising. Place your hope back. Get your hope back today. Somebody stand up and get your hope back. I'm not giving up on my marriage. I'm not giving up on my kids. I'm not dependent on football. I'm not dependent on athletics. I'm dependent on Him. My hope, I look to the hills. Addison, I look to the hills from where my help comes. Your help comes from the Lord. I'm not just up here talking because I like to talk. He's done it in my life. So watch this. Keep waiting even while you're weeping. Keep waiting while you weep. He'll lift your head. Some of you have been in a desperate panic. And God is saying, rest. See, you've been convinced like Elijah that you're alone. Later in this passage, Elijah tells God, I'm the only prophet left. I'm the only one. And God said, hold on, sir. There will always be a remnant. I got 7,000. Number of completion. I got 7,000 ready. And they not bending the knee to Baal. You just ain't seen them. You thought you were on your own. High schooler, You thought at Sprayberry, there's nobody else here that's really loved God. They in there. They in there. They need to see you. They need to see your faith. They need to see your faith. They need to see you say, I used to cut too. I used to be suicidal too, but I have hope. They don't have hope right now. You have hope. You have it. Walk in hope. Stand in hope. He will lift your head. He will renew your strength. You will mount up on wings like eagles. You ever seen an eagle fly? They don't even be trying to fly. They just be floating. They just be gliding. Elijah was being tempted to abandon his assignment that God gave him. By the way, I'm talking about God-given assignments. Not just the assignment you signed up for. Here's an example of your assignment from God. Your marriage, your kids, that's your calling. Your ministry, that's your assignment. So Elijah was losing sight of hope, and his faith began to fade. Watch this. The enemy got him to lose sight of hope, and so then it affected his what? His faith. You see how that works? I'm going to skip ahead real quick. Hebrews 11, verse 1. I'm not supposed to say this till later, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Hebrews 11, verse 1 defines faith this way. Faith is the assurance of things what? Hoped for. Okay? It's the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. You see that? So you see how your hope and your faith are inextricably tied. So when you put your hope in the wrong place, you are opening yourself up for your faith to be shipwrecked. Because you look to that man and you put that man on a pedestal, and that man abused you, and that man walked out on you, and that man was phony. And now you've lost your what? Your faith. This is a silent killer. Write this down. When your faith seems futile, say it slowly. When your faith seems futile, trust that your future is still in his hands. When your faith seems futile, trust that your future is still in his hands. Underline that word, still in his hands. Still. How do I know? Second half of verse 5. Verse 5 says it this way. It says, then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly, an angel touched him. Y'all don't know when to shout. Suddenly, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones. God gave him fresh food. Fresh off the press. Cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. This is God's sovereignty on display. He came to the one tree that he had. In other words, this is almost like what God is saying. It's almost like God was waiting on Elijah. This is important for us. I need y'all to hear me right here. It's almost like God was waiting on Elijah to stop running so that he could start receiving. God had his provision ready. But the first thing Elijah did when he was in trouble was run. What would have happened if instead of running from his enemy, he ran to his help? He just saw God do a miracle. What if he just dropped to his knees and said, Lord, help me. I'm lost. I'm wondering today what would happen if we stopped running from our problems and started inviting God in. Oh, but American Christianity is so polished and cute. We don't talk about the real. But it's right here. I'm not making it up. It's been here all along. Suicide in the Old Testament. Our instinct is to run. But watch this. God's instinct is to give rest. It's almost like he said, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you what? Rest. Rest. In other words, rest is available, Christian. It's available. How many of us are missing out on rest because we're running from the source of it? We're running from it. Watch this. Resting in Christ is a choice. James, it's a choice. It's easy to run. You built this habit, and now your brain even develops neural pathways to where you go to that same sin every single time. Running. When God is saying rest. Don't run. Rest. I know it's uncomfortable. Come to me. I'm sovereign. I have food for you. I can restore you. Rest. This is your homework. Answer this question. When fulfilling my calling gets hard, do I typically choose to run or do I choose to rest? Be honest with yourself. Be honest with him. When your marriage gets hard, do you typically run or do you typically rest? Let's keep reading. Verse 7. Then the angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat. Otherwise, the journey will be too much for you. The journey will be too much for you. So he tapped him. Don't go to sleep, Elijah. I have what you need. So get up and eat. Apparently, Elijah was so exhausted. He was so hopeless that the angel had to wake him up twice for him to choose to keep going. But God's patient. God's patient, though. He could have said, I done sent an angel to feed you and you go to sleep. You took a few bites and went to bed and you're still hopeless. I'm right here. Hello. I have provision. Take and eat. Be restored. See, we think resting is just sleeping. You can rest anywhere. By the grace of God, y'all, I found rest in the hot sun at Six Flags. Just in the wind, I remembered, you're here. You're right here. I'm tired, but you're right here. You're not tired. You're not weary. You're kind of like running the universe right now. Doing a pretty good job, I must say. Rest. Notice the angel does not directly address Elijah's request for God to take his life. He asked him to take his life. The angel didn't even respond to that. See, it's not that God isn't concerned with Elijah's feelings. He just knows that in spite of his feelings, he still has a future. You still have a future. How do I know? Look at what the angel says. The journey ahead. The journey ahead. In other words, he's saying, you have a journey. Today's not the end. He just moved on to the next. The journey ahead will be too much for you. So I need you to eat. Because I got some stuff for you down the road. So he says, get up. That's my message to y'all. Get up out of your paralyzing depression. Oh, depressed Gen Z generation. Get up out the bed. Parents, they're not in their room a lot because that's their personality. That's not their personality to be in bed all day. That's not a personality trait. Something's going on. You can just assume. There's this thing called spiritual warfare. We talked about it earlier. You can just assume the enemy's doing something. Even if it's not what you think it is, it's something. It's something. It may not be as bad as you thought, but it's something. It may not be as bad as you thought. You might overlook it, but it might be bigger than you think it is. In other words, watch this. Mourn, but keep moving. Mourn, but keep moving. I will give our pastor his credit. I stole that from him. He put that in the group me, in the Bible chat. I was like, I'm using that. Mourn, but move. Get out of bed and go serve somebody less fortunate than you. Watch how it renews you. I can have a little bit of hope because I'm in a position where I can help somebody else. Get off the couch and find the creator in nature. Listen to the birds. Wake up in the morning. Watch the sunrise. Feel the breeze. Let him tell you, I'm here. I got you. I got you. I got you. Here's what happens when we choose to rest in him. It's my last point. When we choose to rest in him, this is what God does. God restores our hope when we bring him our hopelessness. He restores our hope when we bring him our hopelessness. How do I know? How do I know? He's restoring your hope even when you bring him your hopelessness. The problem is you bring somebody else your hopelessness, you're going to walk away more hopeless. Or it might get you by for a week and you're going to be on E. But in verse 8, it says Elijah got up and ate and drank. And watch this. Then he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. 40 days. In other words, he was restored. He had some strength he didn't have before. And when God provides, his provision sustains you. Yeah. He don't give you that cheap gas. He gives you the gas you need to get where you need to go and more. And when you feel yourself slowing down, you just check in with him again and you say, man, I got a little bit more in me. I can keep going. He sustains us. He sustained Moses in the wilderness. He sustains us in his grace right now. His grace is sufficient. It's sufficient. It's sustaining you right now. God can restore you. It's just a matter of where you put your hope. Where do you put your hope? In my study this week, I came across a few articles that stopped me in my tracks and deeply convicted me. Like they weren't just on my toes, they were on my chest. I was very convicted. These were articles talking about what I decided to name the sermon today, the epidemic of hopelessness. And these articles, some Christian, some secular, they argue that we use cynicism as a coping mechanism against our disappointment. I could tell that went over some of your heads. We use cynicism as a coping mechanism against our disappointment. Chase, can you put the graphic on the screen, please? I know this is awkward for my people right here, but if you can just glance at that. This is the cyclical effect of cynicism. So watch what happens. You get disappointment. You get disappointed by something. And then the disappointment gives life to the heart of discontentment. Then out of that heart of discontentment flows a critical spirit. Then that critical spirit affirms your disappointment. And the cycle begins. The cycle begins. This is us as Americans. This is our heart posture. We have a heart of discontentment. We've put our hope in all the wrong places. And now we're stuck in the cycle. Just like Elijah, it started with his disappointment. I would imagine that Elijah was hoping that these people would come to faith in God after he did that miracle. And so he had to walk away like, God, how is it that you did that and they still don't believe? He says it later in verse 10. In verse 10, when God asked him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Because Elijah ran to the cave. And Elijah responded, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. But the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're seeking to take my life. In other words, my faith in you is not amounting to anything. Nobody believes in you. They're walking away from you. This is a waste of time. This is how Christian writer Peter Adam defines cynicism. He says, cynicism among Christians appears as a collection of negative attitudes and expectations. Those attitudes may be directed towards ourselves or others, the church, conversions, gospel progress, growth in sanctification, and even toward God himself. Here's a clear example of biblical cynicism. Malachi 3:14, Malachi says the people of Israel has sinned against God because they said this. They said it's vain to serve God. What is the profit of our keeping his charge and of our walking as in mourning before the Lord of hosts? In other words, it's nothing to serve God. It don't amount to nothing. That's cynicism. You've been let down by man, and so you blame God. You've been let down by you, and you blame him. So this is what we do today. We put our hope in man, and we get mad at God when man fails. You've been hurt by the church, blame God. You put your hope in your ability to stay faithful to God. So you say you lost your faith in God, but you really only ever had faith in yourself. You put your hope in the president instead of putting your hope in God's providence. You refuse to confess your own sin, so all you see is the sin of others. You've been in church and you've been messed up. You've seen messed up church people. You've seen how messed up church people can be, so now you've stopped letting